My Phil's name is called when his turn comes, and he disappears with the nurse into the examination room. But when I tried to accompany him, the nurse stopped me. As I was wondering, I was led alone in the opposite direction from the inspection room and called to a separate room. Inside, there was a thin doctor with piercing eyes staring at me intently. He opened his mouth as if he had made up his mind. "How much do you know? Excuse me?" I was baffled and left with my mouth agape, not understanding what he meant. "Oh, I'm sorry. Well," his hesitant response made me more suspicious. What was he trying to say? Really, you still can't get your words out properly, can you? I turned around at that voice and saw my husband, Brooks, who was supposed to be on a business trip, standing there. "I wonder why he is here." Ignoring my confusion, he said, "I want you to look at this." As he spoke, he operated his smartphone and showed it to me. "What? No way. How?" I widened my eyes and stared at the screen. On an unfamiliar website, my pottery creations were being sold. A mix of shock and agitation overwhelmed me, leaving my mind in a whirl. Of course, I had no idea about this. Who on earth did this and why? Instead of anger, I felt a swirl of sadness in my heart. "I need to check something with Taylor about Dad." His words jolted me. What did he need to check about my Phil? I waited intently for my husband's next words. "My name is Gabriella. I live with my husband, Brooks, and my Phil, Robert." "Phil, it's a beautiful day today. The azaleas in the garden are starting to bloom. Is that so? Is it that time of year already?" My father-in-law smiled beside me, though he is completely blind. I knew his vision had been poor for before. His peripheral vision turned black, and his field of vision gradually narrowed. Without knowing the cause, his condition didn't improve despite treatment, and he lived with the help of his wife. However, after his wife passed away, his condition suddenly worsened. Neither Brooks nor I expected him to lose his sight so quickly. Brooks said he couldn't leave his blind father living alone. Yeah, it's dangerous to be alone, especially with all the scam incidents happening lately. Brooks and I talked it over and decided to live with my Phil. By the way, since he can't work, my Phil now lives off disability benefits. This was something my late Mill had arranged, and it was deposited into his account every month without fail. Although it seemed he withdrew small amounts as needed, a considerable amount was left. With that much money, we could have hired a helper, but my Phil refused. "Don't waste money like that," he insisted. I quit my job to take care of him. My boss was disappointed, saying, "It's a shame to lose someone as talented as you," but it couldn't be helped. I decided to work part-time a few days a week and take on the caregiving and housework. "Gabriella, I'm really sorry you had to quit your job. I expected it, so don't worry. How about you?" "Well, actually, the company has decided to expand overseas, so I might have more business trips." Brooks works for a manufacturer, but I hadn't heard anything about going abroad before. "That's amazing." I was genuinely happy, but Brooks looked a bit down. "But I'm sad I won't be able to be with you, Gabriella." With a small sigh, he trudged toward the bathroom. I think it was the first time I'd seen him so dejected. He's always smiling, and rarely says he's lonely. So his words took me by surprise. Maybe my excitement had the opposite effect. From the next month, just as he said, his business trips increased, and he was away from home more often. I was busy every day preparing meals for my father-in-law, cleaning the house, and working part-time. But while shopping at the supermarket, I had a sudden realization. Taking care of my Phil was easier than I had thought. When we first moved in together, I expected to help with bathing, toileting, and getting around both inside and outside the house. I assumed I would have to feed him since he probably couldn't use chopsticks. However, he could bathe on his own and handle his own needs. He could eat fairly neatly with a spoon. He moved smoothly around the house without tripping over anything. "It's no problem in a familiar house," he said with a smile. To my surprise, he could also operate a smartphone, using voice recognition to make calls and look things up. When I heard voices from his room, he was often chatting with the phone's AI about various topics like fairy tales. Even I only use my smartphone for calls and messages. Despite this, he still needed regular checkups, so he went to the hospital periodically. But even then, he insisted on going alone. But there's a crosswalk, it's dangerous. I can hear the signals, and you have to get on and off the bus. I can do it myself. Puffing out his cheeks in a pout, he staggered out on his own. I followed him secretly, worried, but he really did cross the street and get on the bus without any trouble. Later, he told me he used the smartphone's voice guidance to walk. My Phil was adamant about doing everything alone, almost as if he wanted to keep his distance from me. Still, it was a relief not to be overwhelmed by caregiving and housework. With some extra time and energy, I decided to try a local pottery class. It was just a one-day experience, but I enjoyed it so much that I was hooked right away. Since then, I've been teaching myself pottery at home little by little. When I bought and read a pottery magazine, I found an interesting headline: "Smaller pieces can be baked in a home oven." As I read on, it seems that there is indeed clay. Most of the materials could be bought at a dollar store, making it easy to enjoy pottery at home. I decided to try it out, finding spare moments and working quietly at night. In middle and high school, I never did well in art, usually getting grades like C or D. For someone like me to start pottery was unexpected. Every day, I felt so excited that I found myself humming. One night, my husband came to the kitchen for a drink of water and saw me kneading clay while humming. "What are you making? A giant cookie?" He pointed at the flattened brown clay on a baking sheet. I was shaping it to make a plate. "Oh, I thought it was a late-night snack. Sorry to disappoint you, but do take a look when it's finished. Good night," he said, and he went back to his room. He had another business trip starting tomorrow. He seemed like he wanted to talk more, but maybe out of consideration, he quickly left. It felt like we were missing each other, yet we weren't exactly on bad terms, a strange sensation. I shook off that feeling and focused on pottery. At first, I made simple shapes like plates and chopstick rests. But as I got used to it, I wanted to make something more challenging. Not a full-scale pottery piece, but something more than the basics. While I was pondering, the wind blew papers and envelopes off the table. I had forgotten that I had left the window open in the afternoon. Oh no, I hurriedly picked them up and used a nearby jar to hold them down. That's it. A paperweight is small and doable. I thought, why not make one without any pressure to showcase it somewhere? Something a bit stylish, I mused, kneading the clay. The image of a cat I used to have came to mind. We had rescued a stray, named her Belle, and took care of her with love. I decided to model the paperweight after Belle. Once I had the idea, I worked quickly. I recalled her face, her paws, her tail bit by bit. In my smartphone photos, Belle, with her black and white fur, was comfortably nestled in Brooks's arms. I remembered the happy times we had, the two of us with our cat. Belle has since crossed the Rainbow Bridge, but I hoped she was doing well. It took about a month of trial and error to complete Belle's paperweight. I was so thrilled that I wanted to show it to someone. Just then, I had plans to go to lunch with friends, so I took it with me. When I showed it to them, they exclaimed, "How cute," and took photos with their phones. Their unexpectedly positive reactions surprised me. Belle, looking content beside the pasta dishes, had a certain charm. My friends requested that I make one for them too. "Are you sure? It's just homemade and amateurish." They liked that it was handmade. The following month, I brought several Belle paperweights in different poses. My friends each took their favorite one, and the only one left was Belle washing her face. A week later, I noticed several messages from a friend who had taken a paperweight. She said she had posted the paperweight on social media and received dozens of emails within just 3 days. Most of them asked, "Where can I buy one?" I was surprised by the response. I never expected it to be so overwhelming. My friends kept encouraging me to sell my creations online. They insisted they would sell for sure. However, I wasn't making them to sell. I considered it just a hobby and felt uncomfortable turning it into a business. Besides, I'm not tech savvy and had no idea where to start. I barely touch my smartphone, checking messages from friends only every 2 or 3 days. While I was pondering what to do, the inquiries kept piling up, surpassing 100 emails. My friends, feeling guilty, tried to pay me properly for my work. I felt bad for them. I asked them to reply to their messages on social media with, "Not for sale." During another lunch, the topic came up again. Maybe I could just take the cost of the materials. I wasn't making a living as a potter. That would be enough, I said, and they happily agreed to pay for the materials. Brooks was also intrigued by the little figurines. When he returned from a business trip and saw the Belle paperweight on the desk, he exclaimed, "Wait, is this Belle? Did you make this?" He picked it up with his thumb and forefinger and brought it to me, looking delighted. "Yes, doesn't it look like her?" "It's great. It's so cute. This Belle looks just like her." When I told him it had become a small sensation on social media, he smiled. "Online selling is easy. Set up a site, upload some photos. Don't you know the saying, it's easier to say than done? I can help. After all, I'm a salesman," he said, thumping his chest. He was enthusiastic and started muttering plans about an e-commerce site. However, selling meant starting a business, even if only slightly. I wasn't confident about starting something so casually. "I'm not interested in selling," I said, taking the Belle paperweight from his hand and placing it back on the desk. "And besides, you know I'm not good with the internet. I'll support you. Oh, by the way, the plate I made the other day is finished. I'll get it." I turned and went to the kitchen cupboard. I couldn't see the expression on Brooks's face. When I returned from the kitchen, he was gone. Only the Belle washing her face was left on the desk. "Belle, what should I do?" Belle didn't answer. She just kept washing her face, as if to say she didn't care. On a day with scattered sheep clouds, I came home humming, and my father-in-law asked, "Did something good happen today?" That day, I had shown the Belle paperweight to my pottery class instructor. I had mentioned to my Phil that I was doing pottery, but it never really came up in conversation. I showed the piece I talked about to my teacher. Sitting in the living room chair, he listened to my voice. "Oh, what kind of plate is it?" "This time it's not a plate, it's a figurine." As I spoke, I felt something off. What did he just say? Beside me, he smiled and said again, "That's nice. I wonder if I could try pottery too." What? I couldn't believe my ears, but I thought it was a great opportunity. It was a chance to bond with my father-in-law, who seemed to be distancing himself. This way, I could prevent him from doing dangerous things like crossing the street alone. "You can definitely do it. You seem very handy. Even blind people can create art." I let my Phil touch sample plates and chopstick rests, teaching him how to shape the clay similarly. Unable to see, he repeatedly checked the shape with his fingers while kneading the clay. He found the texture, coldness, and softness of the clay refreshing and enjoyable. He seemed to continue creating while I was at my part-time job. When I got home, several pieces were lined up on the baking sheet. Though slightly misshapen, they were all charming. "Wow, you did great." Carefully, I moved them to the drying shelf to prevent them from getting ruined. While monitoring how dry they were, I baked each one of them in the oven. During this time, I noticed another odd thing. Oh, Belle's paperweight that was here is gone. The paperweight of Belle washing her face, which was on the desk, had disappeared. I also realized that other figurines, like the rabbit and frog, as well as chopstick rests, were missing. When I asked my Phil, he suggested he might have accidentally broken or thrown them away. "I often carried them as samples. I'm so sorry." "Oh, I see. I'm really sorry. Because I'm blind." Even the cat figurine. With a dejected look, he bowed his head, and I couldn't pursue it further. "It's fine, I'm sure. It was probably taken by little elves," I said, laughing to ease the tension. Even such a childish excuse seemed to comfort him. Though my Phil continued creating, I started to feel a clear sense of unease about his actions. When I told Brooks about it, he looked incredulous. "I'm usually at work or on business trips." He dismissed it, saying he didn't really understand. While I continued to feel unsettled, the day of my Phil's regular checkup arrived. Brooks had left on a business trip that morning. Having grown closer to my Phil through pottery, I was able to accompany him today. We arrived at the hospital before noon, and after checking in, we waited for our turn. The receptionist seemed to be talking about something while glancing our way. No, it is not necessarily about me or Phil. I realized I was probably being too self-conscious and focused on the pottery magazine I had brought. Soon, my Phil's name was called, and he disappeared into the examination room with the nurse. but when I tried to follow, the nurse stopped me. Why? Since it was my first time coming with my FIL, they might be checking who I was. As I was wondering, I was led alone in the opposite direction from the inspection room and called to a separate room. Inside the room, a thin doctor was sitting, handing a clear file to a nurse. After the nurse left, the doctor looked at me. The nameplate showed Taylor. With piercing eyes, he opened his mouth as if making a decision. How much do you know? Excuse me? What was he talking about? I stared at Taylor, confused, with my mouth agape. I thought it was about my father-in-law's vision, but something felt off. This is my first time coming along for the test, so I'm not sure what you mean by how much do I know. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't explain well. His hesitant response made me more suspicious. What is it? Suddenly, he stared intently behind me. I turned around to see Brooks, who was supposed to be on a business trip, standing there. Really, you still can't get your words out properly, can you? I couldn't hide my surprise at his sighing remark. Brooks, why are you here? I came to check something with Taylor. It's about Dad. His words about Dad jolted me. What did he need to check with Taylor about Phil? The way Brooks addressed him so casually suggested they were quite close. Apparently, they had been friends since their school days. I also need to confirm something, Mrs. It's about Robert. I got flustered when he addressed me as Mrs. Could you tell me about his usual behavior? I recounted his daily routine, from waking up to going to bed. He could bathe and take care of himself, eat his meals properly, and even go to his regular check-ups alone. At home, he enjoyed chatting on his smartphone. As I talked about Robert's usual behavior, Taylor nodded thoughtfully. I also mentioned that my Phil had recently started pottery and was working on it even when I wasn't home. I showed Taylor photos of his pottery pieces I had taken with my phone. His recent works were much more refined and less misshapen. Taylor hummed thoughtfully as he looked at them. Is there anything else? Specifically, anything unusual in Robert's behavior? I thought for a moment. The only thing that came to mind was his insistence on doing everything alone despite being completely blind. He seems to be trying to keep his distance from me. I see. Is there anything else that concerns you? Now that you mention it. I remembered that a few days ago, some of my pottery pieces had gone missing at home. When I asked him, he said he might have thrown it away by mistake because he was blind. But something about that explanation felt off. Looking back further, I recalled the odd feeling I had just before he said he wanted to try pottery. I told him I was going to show my pottery piece to my teacher, but he had responded, "What kind of plate is it?" Both words start with P, so I thought it was just a mix-up. However, he had clearly recognized it as a plate. It was as if he had seen me making plates before and knew about it. Then Brooks started talking. I want Gabriella to see this. He operated his smartphone and showed me the screen. There was a picture of a paperweight of a face-washing bell, which I thought was lost. Looking closely, I saw a price tag on it, indicating it was listed on some sales site. What? No way, how? I stared at the screen in shock. I had no recollection of putting it up for sale, so why was it there? The mix of surprise and agitation left my mind in a whirl. I felt a swirl of sadness in my heart rather than anger. Gabriella, you really didn't know about this site or that your work was being sold online? I nodded to my husband, who was looking at me seriously. No, I have no idea about any of this. Who could have done this? We'll find out soon, he muttered meaningfully and made a phone call. Taylor nodded at Brooks, who was making the call. I watched them both, utterly confused. Hello, police. I was stunned as I watched Brooks call the police. The story goes back to 2 days ago. Brooks was taking a break with a colleague when he was introduced to a website specializing in selling cat figurines. He was told to check out a particular figurine that the colleague found interesting. He showed me because the design of a cat washing its face was unique. The moment he saw it, Brooks instinctively knew it was the bell paperweight I had made. The seller's information indicated they were selling these works to fund stray cat rescue efforts. It also mentioned that the artist was completely blind, which gave Brooks a bad feeling. The artist's name was Ryuji, and he was blind, and the figurine looked familiar. Brooks could only think of one person who could get hold of my work. It's hard to believe Gabriella was involved. She told me she wasn't interested in selling. Brooks also recalled the uneasy feeling I had mentioned. If Gabriella hadn't talked about it, I wouldn't have realized. Maybe Dad. You suspect he can actually see? Taylor continued the conversation, picking up where my hesitant husband left off. Just 2 days ago, he contacted me about his father. He was genuinely shocked when I said I was the one in charge. Taylor had his doubts about my Phil's blindness. During tests, he acted as if he couldn't see. But his movements and mannerisms didn't match those of a blind person. The nurses had the same suspicions. I don't want to doubt a patient, but with downcast eyes, he said that. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the hallway. We rushed out to see my Phil being questioned by 2 police officers. He was shouting and seemed to be in a panic. "Phil!" I tried to go to him, but Brooks grabbed my arm and stopped me. Moments later, my father-in-law broke free from the police and ran at full speed. The waiting room was crowded with patients, and a collision seemed inevitable. However, he skillfully avoided the chairs, patients, and nurses, like a soccer player maneuvering past opponents. Everyone watched in amazement as the 2 police officers quickly caught up with him and apprehended him. "Let me go. I can't see." His desperate cries were futile. It was clear he could see. The police stood him up and took him away for questioning. During the subsequent interrogation, it was revealed that my Phil had created and operated a fraudulent sales site. He had been selling his own works and some of mine. It seemed he did it for money, but his claim about funding stray cat rescue efforts was a lie. He confessed he did it because he couldn't live on his pension alone. After the incident at the hospital, local media visited our house daily, requesting interviews. My Phil pretending to be blind and deceiving even his family to sell handmade cat figurines became a bit of a news story. "I'm sorry, but we can't comment," I repeatedly told them through the intercom. As for my Phil, he was ostracized by the neighborhood and rarely left his room, hiding under the covers. In our frustration, we decided to ask for help from his brother, Nicholas. He was a former military officer and was once known as the Devil's Instructor. Despite his gentle nature, his strong sense of justice made him furious about what my Phil had done. Even though Nicholas lived 3 hours away by train, he rushed over with a look of fury. "This is utterly disgraceful. You're coming to my house to straighten out your act." He yanked the covers off my trembling Phil and grabbed him by the scruff of his neck. "Brother, please stop. I don't want to go outside." Crying and clinging, my father-in-law was powerless against the former sergeant. Nicholas apologized for the trouble caused and took him back on the train. My Phil had never been able to stand up to his older brother. He won't be able to do anything bad now. Maybe this will finally make him live honestly. Brooks murmured sadly. This was for the best. Brooks quickly shut down the website my father-in-law had created, but something unexpected happened online. Today, that colleague told me. Apparently, photos of the closed site had been spread on social media by someone who had seen it. People were comparing my cat figurines to my Phil's, noting that mine had a gentler expression. The personality of the creator seemed to shine through, gaining popularity and word-of-mouth praise. My colleague even said he wants a Bell paperweight. Brooks spoke excitedly, looking very pleased. "But the site is shut down, and I'm not interested in selling online." "About that?" Brooks cut in eagerly. His colleague knew someone who ran a boutique nearby. The shop owner, a woman, had seen my work on social media and wanted to carry it in her store. However, she didn't know how to contact me. "Nearby, that stylish shop on the corner? Yes. Maybe you should go over there tomorrow." Encouraged by Brooks, I decided to visit the shop. The owner was adorned with cat accessories, making her love for cats evident. I agreed to her offer, and my pieces were displayed in her store. Later, I brought more items like chopstick rests and plates for display. I felt a mix of happiness and anxiety about whether they would sell. Using the artist name, Midori Nico Bell, the pieces sold quickly. The pieces were often sold out quickly as they were being sold while they were being made. The sales were modest, but I was filled with surprise and joy. I decided to donate part of the proceeds to stray cat rescue efforts, thinking Bell would approve. This donation led to more connections with people involved in rescue work and local artists. Even my pottery class teacher would sometimes visit. Life became fulfilling and joyful. People started calling me Belle, after my beloved cat. It felt strange, but also like a bond she had created. Right, Belle? I looked at the Belle paperweight on the living room table. I'm home. Brooks had returned without me noticing, smiling brightly as he approached. What was going on? Today is our anniversary and the day we first met Belle. He placed a cake box next to the Belle paperweight. Oh, right. My heart swelled with happiness, and I hugged Brooks tightly. Belle, while washing her face, seemed to smile and say, I don't care.